All right, we're going to get started here in just a minute. There's a sign-up sheet at the podium. This is your last chance to sign up, so please do if you'd like to be heard. While we're doing that, I'd like the members of the committee to please introduce themselves so that most of us know who you are, but so that all of us know who you are.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Carla Drenner. I represent District 85. I've been down here for a little while. This is my 10th term, and I represent Central DeKalb area, the cities of Avondale Estates, Clarkston, and a little bit of Decatur.
And my name is Ron Stevens. This is 21 years that I've finished in Atlanta. I represent Savannah as my home, Bryan County, Liberty County, Chatham County, and just glad to be here. This is a huge property rights issue, and I'm honored to be here to listen.
My name is Spencer Fry. I represent the 118th, which is North and East Athens, Georgia. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm Matt Dollar. I represent East Cobb and portion of Sandy Springs. This is my 16th term, or 16th year rather. And this is not the first time the legislature has looked at this issue. We looked at it a few years ago. We had a study committee and I was a part of that committee. And the findings at the time were the industry was still growing, still maturing, and we kind of should wait and see what direction it was heading in before the state needed to look into it or address it. And I most feel at that time has come. So that is the purpose of this committee. It looks like we have a lot of people who wanted to sign up. If you are with an association, I'm going to ask you to limit your comments to 5 to 10 minutes if you can. And I want to make sure that everybody here is heard. But if we could not be repeating each other, if something's been said, we don't need to hear the same thing over and over. So with that, the first person on the list here is Greg Holcomb. Is Greg Holcomb here? Okay. Then we'll go to Jim. Jim Sprouse, are you here? Okay, and then after Jim, Larry Ramsey is on deck. Okay, all right. Thank you. Just for the committee, please let us know who you are and who you are here with. Many cities are wrestling with complaints from their citizens about party houses disrupting their communities. Short-term rentals should compete on a level playing field. Am I not on?
Sorry. They should be subject to oversight, taxes, and fees as any other business that serves the public. That should include collecting and remitting local occupancy and sales tax in a way that's verifiable and with complete transparency on the location. Registration of the host location with local authorities in compliance with the appropriate federal, state, municipal laws and regulations. All right, and there's a discussion about this that's going on across the country and in most major cities, and I've got follow-up coming behind me that's an expert on what's happening nationally in terms of that. So you'll hear from Troy. He's further down your list. Any questions for me?
If we do have any questions, members can ask. I think throughout this process, you're going to have questions that arise I'd ask the people who are presenting to stick around in case we have any questions. I do have a couple of questions for you, but I want to kind of get through the list first. Sure. And I know Larry, I told you were next, but since we'll just go ahead and segue into Troy Flanagan.
All right.
If he's here. Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Troy Flanagan with the American Hotel and Lodging Association. We work with Jim and the Georgia Hotel Association as well as other groups around the country. This is certainly an issue that, especially in the 4 years since this committee last met, which I was here at that time as well, there's been a lot of debate, a lot of solutions that have been tried. Some have worked, some have not worked. Many have been litigated with various outcomes. So just wanted to provide a little bit of context around some of that. And again, of course, happy to stick around for some questions and answers. The first thing I would say is that our members, the hotel industry, is not opposed to home sharing. I want to make sure that we have the correct terminology in the context of this debate. Home sharing, speaking more about the way some of these platforms really came about 10 years or so ago, primarily where a host would offer part of their home or an accessory dwelling throughout the year, but typically when they were home for extra income. And then in addition to that, perhaps offering your home for rent for a limited amount of time. There's federal regulations that get into what that means. It's I don't know if you're aware, but it's often called the master's rule, 14 days. That's kind of an accepted amount of time to rent out your entire home. But what we're seeing is a lot of cities are looking at cities and states are looking at something like 60 days to 90 days. But that's what we would consider home sharing. I think what we're seeing increasingly, especially in the last 4 years, is home sharing is not what has built the growth and the valuation growth of any of these companies. It's commercial operators. It's investors who have taken units at condo buildings in downtown Atlanta next to a convention center or in any city or any locality around the country, and they've commoditized multiple units, which they offer nightly throughout the year, none of which are their primary residence or even their second or third residence. That, to us, is running a hotel or a B&B or some form of the lodging industry. But unfortunately, in almost all of these jurisdictions, it's not being treated as such, even with the most basic oversight. And I'm talking about just business registration. In most cases, that's not even required or not enforced. There are taxes that are collected in some places, not always on par with the way hotels are required to collect taxes and provide data, which is a whole different concern we have. So I think the thing that I would say that has changed in the last 4 years is that we've seen a lot of jurisdictions really take a close look at this. Some are more urbanized places, but even places that are not, states like Virginia and Wisconsin, their legislatures passed basic statewide oversight that either created a statewide business registration system or authorized their local governments, in the case of Virginia, to do some basic registration and set limits on the fines so the cities are not doing things too excessive, as has often been the accusation. And we support that, and we've worked in those places where to find the right solution for the right jurisdiction. This is not a silver bullet. There is no silver bullet solution for this. Much as the way hotels are regulated and taxed differently in every single jurisdiction across the country, so will the solution to this. It will look different in Savannah as it will in Atlanta, as it will in any place outside of this state. I just want to say that, you know, a little bit of echo of what Jim mentioned is that as this has grown, there are certainly quality of life repercussions. It's not just about impacts on taking housing off the market in more expensive places like Atlanta. There is an housing affordability issue, but there's a quality of life issue when you get into more residential neighborhoods where you certainly do have some property rights issues and some quality of life. But I would just suggest that there's the property rights also of the families who purchased housing and purchased property in a quiet residential neighborhood, and now they're having to deal with different groups of people and guests every single weekend that are disrupting that, often in violation of homeowner association covenants, which, you know, those are not governmental laws, so they're very difficult to enforce by a voluntary process. I'll just stop there, and again, happy to answer any questions. I'll stick around, and thank you for your time.
I don't see any questions. Thank you. So Larry Ramsey, and then next, has Greg Holcomb joined us? He's not going to be here. Okay. All right. He's not here. So after that, Andrew McConnell, are you here? Okay. Hey, Andrew. You'll go next. All right.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. Larry Ramsey with ACCG on behalf of Georgia County Governments. I'll try to be very brief. As we usually try to do at ACCG, we want to be a resource to the committee to the extent you need information from county governments. We want to make sure that we're here to provide that for you. I can tell you a little bit along those lines that earlier this summer we did try to survey our county governments about what they're doing in this area from a regulatory standpoint. Of the 100+ counties that we heard back from, we've identified 11 that have come up with some sort of regulation, sometimes in the zoning context, sometimes in a permitting ordinance type context, and we have a couple of other counties that are in the process of considering regulations along these lines. All of these have been, from what I've seen, as a result of a long process working with their citizens, working with those interested parties to determine what's best for that local community. And I think that's the first main point that I would make on behalf of county governments, is that what we've seen kind of reflects the idea that different localities have different needs, different concerns. Some of the counties that have gone into, come up with regulations related to this are in the mountain areas where you probably have rentals that are more dispersed. We also have counties around Lake Lanier, Lake Oconee, that have come up with different regulatory schemes, and that makes some sense because there you have a more compact, you might have subdivisions right on Lake Oconee where the concerns of the citizens might be a little different. From our perspective, we would like to preserve the local government's ability to determine what's best for their local communities, just like the committee that the chairman referenced in 2015. That was one of the outcomes of that committee, saying that this was probably an issue best determined at the local level with the citizens working with their local governments. So that's one piece. Also, it's been touched on before, is the revenue side. As you know, county governments don't have the ability to come up with simply come up with their own new revenue sources. It's up to the state to determine what avenues they have for generating revenues. Hotel motel tax is one of those areas, and to the extent that you have these type of uses that are not on the same playing field as hotels and motels that are collecting sales taxes, collecting hotel motel taxes, that's an issue that we're concerned about. I can tell you from what I can tell, obviously the big players from a platform standpoint here are Airbnb and VRBO, which is actually part of HomeAway. Airbnb's model, I understand their models are a little different, but Georgia is one of only 7 states that has not entered into some sort of agreement with Airbnb when it comes to collecting at least sales taxes and in some case hotel motel taxes as well. That also was an issue touched on in the 2015 committee report. It's something that was worth exploring at the state level to try to make sure we're having those taxes that are owed actually being collected. And that's something that we hope the committee can continue to look at as we go through the next several meetings. But again, we want to be here as a resource for the committee. To the extent you need information related to what counties are doing in this arena, we're here to help and appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you. I actually do have one question for you. You mentioned that 11 counties have some kind of a structure in place to address this issue, short-term rentals. Can you just touch on what some of those local governments are doing?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Certainly, some counties, and I've seen this around Lake Lanier, are looking at actual permitting ordinances so that they can know who is providing these short-term rental properties, so that they know, for example, who to contact in the event there's an emergency. You know, who's the contact person in charge of overseeing that property in the event some issue comes up while it's rented. Other counties, I know Greene County is an example on Lake Oconee that has looked at this from a zoning perspective. So determining those particular zoning districts in which this type of use would be appropriate and not appropriate. So I think those are probably the two main schemes. They're not mutually exclusive. And this is something obviously there's cities involved in too, but I don't have data about the cities. But I think those are kind of the two main models. You've got the zoning, let's figure out what areas of the county are maybe most appropriate for this type of use. And then others where we want to try to have a better idea of, in the event there's noise issues, public safety issues, who do we get in touch with who's really responsible for that property when it's rented out to somebody on a short-term basis.
Okay, and we do have somebody from Municipal Association who's going to speak to that, and we'll be in Savannah on Saturday and hear from City of Savannah, who has the most, I guess, complex structure in place to address this. It was brought to my attention last year because I was not aware of it, but it's in Georgia Code. Did you know that in Georgia Code it is actually it's not allowed, it's illegal to make somebody register a residential property?
I'm familiar with that statute, and I remember when it was put into place. It's interesting. I think at the time, if I remember, the city of Roswell was looking at, it wasn't in this context because this market didn't really exist then, but it had to do with more longer-term residential rental properties, and they had come up with some sort of registry at the city level, and that statute was in response to it. I think it's a fair question. You know, I've thought of that statute as well in this context. Again, it was written for a different situation, so it's not a tight fit, but I think it is an issue that is obviously very relevant to what this committee is looking at in this new context. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And who is here from the Municipal Association?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
Michael McPherson.
Hey, Michael, all right.
I can speak on Saturday, or I can speak a little bit today, whichever you like.
Yeah, I think some of the members won't be there on Saturday, so if you could make a few comments, that'd be appreciated.
Sure. Let me start by.
If you need a couple of minutes, I know this is kind of, if you need a couple of minutes to get your
I'm
comments
good. This is
okay.
something that we've been working on for a long time. We were there for the study committee a couple years ago, and we're happy to participate, in the discussion today, because there are things that I think need to be approached at the state level, and we want to be part of that discussion to ensure that there is a level playing field for folks in this area, and to ensure public safety across the board, because that's what it boils down to at the end of the day. Going home and feeling comfortable that you're safe when you enter your home. And so we've added a piece to our policy platform over the past couple of years that specifically speaks to short-term rentals or vacation rentals. I'll read that to you. GMA supports local control of regulation of short-term rentals as necessary for quality of life, public safety, and a competitive lodging marketplace. GMA supports the legal use of properties as short-term or vacation rentals by individuals licensed to do business and pay the appropriate state and local taxes. And so there too, speak to the level playing field and the public safety aspect. But I think Jim and some of the other, or Jim and Troy hit on some of the pieces. We require things of our hotels and our bed and breakfasts, such as linen requirements and sanitation requirements that the code doesn't speak to in terms of these providers of short-term rentals. And so do we need a definition for short-term rentals, or do we classify them as commercial purveyors of lodging? That's the question, ultimately. So with that, I mean, I'm happy to speak a little bit more on Saturday after Savannah gives its position and states what they've been through. But I think we're in line with what Larry said. But also, since we're boots on the ground with a lot of our cities that are currently going through these issues, we are aware of some of the problems, that are out there. So the party houses. I don't want to be repetitive, but party houses and other disruptive properties. One of the other questions that I had that I think the committee should definitely be aware of is in terms of residential properties. How do we know that someone that is renting a property within a residential neighborhood or wherever that may have a restraining order put on them is not violating the terms of their restraining order just to eavesdrop? I mean, these are the types of questions that have been brought up, but that gets down to the root of it. We've got to come up with a system where we know who to call when there's an issue so that the city can be responsive, local governments can be responsive to those issues. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Michael, I'm a little, talk a little bit about the revenue side of it. The typical person that pays property taxes. Now talk about the sales tax and the hotel motel tax and the $5 fee. That I'm a big proponent of leveling the playing field for everybody. And can you talk a little bit about that? Are you guys getting every bit that you're supposed to get?
I'm happy to. So one of the issues that I'm sure the Ways and Means Committee will be very concerned about if a legislative package moves forward in this area is the difference between those properties that are identified as residence that you live in, your homestead, which you get a tax break on for being a homestead where you live, not a commercial property. These properties are being used to make money, some of them in a very commercial manner. And so that's one of the things that certainly needs to be approached. Not saying that that should be outlawed or anything like that, but it needs to be discussed, because that is a distinct difference between one residential property and another, is that the state offers very, very gracious, incentive there for homeowners. So with local taxes, we've got a hotel motel tax scheme that allows flexibility across the jurisdictions to enter into a hotel motel tax amount that's right for their area. That hotel motel tax is then used to bring more heads into the beds of the area, used as tourism dollars on the one hand, and then for regulatory purposes on the other, and as general fund. But we've got a system in place where those monies are decided on by the local community as in terms of their best use for promoting the community and its great assets to bring people to the area. And it's come under criticism in different ways because there's so many different structures in place under that code. But in general, it works, and it works very well in our communities that use it well. So that's another thing, that capturing those dollars would level the playing field greatly. And I think Savannah's been successful in that. But Savannah, as they'll point out, went through a great stakeholder process, included everybody, and kind of meted out those issues and concerns that are true probably only to Savannah because of the uniqueness and the history there. So that's another aspect. Was there any other tax element that you wanted me to talk about?
Well, a little bit differently than that, I think you hit on most of the tax things, and of course the $5 fee that we get that the hotels pay. I'm not sure that we capture that with the short-term rentals, and of course, leveling the playing field. I want everybody to be treated the same. Last year, a little different question. We addressed the rideshare program to make sure that the liability insurance that these folks are carrying were the same that you might have with a commercial taxi service. And of course, we addressed that, and it took a couple of years to study. What about liability coverage that you might have, and this might come back to Jim, versus somebody? Is it different from a VRBO from a resident that's coming in there to stay on a short-term basis versus a hotel?
So that may be a good question for Savannah in terms of what their ordinance has in place. But I'm really not aware of the differences in terms of what the expectations are that are in the ordinances that are in place right now. Atlanta is in the process of coming up with a structure for the city that allows these things to function, and levels the playing field at the same time. So I don't know if there's an insurance requirement there, but it's something that I think we can find out in Savannah when we look at their ordinance. Now, in terms of the companies, that may be a good question for Airbnb representative or somebody from one of the other groups that manage this type of function, because I'm sure that they have some requirements in terms of who they allow to use their web base. So might be a good question for them.
Do any of the ordinances with any of this is the last one, Mr. Chairman, do any of the ordinances from any of the cities, and I know Savannah's pretty in-depth with theirs whenever they allow permits for these things to happen, and I believe they've capped them in certain areas. I don't have an opinion one way or another on that, but do any of the cities have a revocable permit whenever there's a perpetual problem like an alcohol license, for example?
I would think the permit in itself would be revocable should any of the requirements for the permit not be met or be broken. I would think that that's kind of part of that permit process. But I mean, some ordinances are written better than others.
Okay, no more questions. I have a question for you. We heard that 11 counties have some kind of, requirement, structure, licensing, whatever in place. Do you have a number on how many cities have addressed this?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't. So the last time I counted, I think there were only 6 or 7, and one of them, Blue Ridge, was the example. The city is not the entity that went into the structure. It was the actual providers that said, hey, we got to get ahead of this thing. Let's come up with a structure, bring it to the city, and make sure we're all operating on the up and up.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a unique instance there. Savannah, I think, is the one that's been in the news the most because I think it's the largest city that has gone into an ordinance that's detailed because of the nature of the city. The historic neighborhoods within the city, I believe, began to lose kind of their residential feel because there's just a whole bunch of transient folks in those neighborhoods now, where once it was not like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, be interested to hear what's been happening since the last time they testified, and now on Saturday.
Yeah, it's Savannah is the biggest market, and I've been contacted by a few other cities who are contemplating some type of a framework on this, and like a lot of other people out there, cities are also kind of wondering, what to do, and I was just curious, so thank you for that. We did have another question pop up, and Dr. Drenner?
I was just curious if any of the metropolitan area, has the city of Atlanta done anything about this yet?
City of Atlanta is currently working on a process, and I haven't seen the draft, but I did meet the attorney today that is working on it, or one of them, and so we should hear more about that, soon. But I don't know that it's going to be as in depth as Savannah, because because of the nature of the two cities is very, very different. And that's really the theme of the whole discussion, is that in terms of the municipal association, our cities are radically different in size, in geography. I mean, everything's flat once you get down to a certain point in the state, and it's hilly as you move north,
Yeah,
side to side, and so it's very different in terms of the issues brought forward and how they can be handled in different size cities, no matter where they're at in the state.
Yeah, so I can say that, like Sandy Springs, for instance, has banned them, and that's one that I would consider that a metro. And then I've been contacted by 2 other metro cities who are looking and trying to figure out what to do as well. But I think they want to wait to see what the legislature's response is going to be first. So
Question. So as a part of the National League of Cities, this is not endemic just to Georgia. This is an issue that faces everyone, every city. Have you been, you have model legislation or guidance from the national group as to how other places?
Well, so there's one thing. If you're a student of comparative state legislatures, you'll know that our state is very unique in terms of our local governments and how it handles its local governments compared to others. And so where we look to the National League for guidance, and we hear about the issues in different states, the code structures are so different that we really can't take much from them.
I'm not looking for a code, a particular response.
But the issues are the same.
I'm
yeah.
looking for an issue, keeping in mind that I understand that this is a local issue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious how bigger cities who probably have already dealt with this, like San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York City, they probably have gone down this path as well. And I'm just curious if you all have garnered any type of information from them.
Yeah, and like I said, their situations are very different. There's different players involved that I don't think that we have to worry about here in the state. But I think the difference between New York and San Francisco is very radically different in terms of how those two cities handled it. I'd have to look at a case study to be able to give you more information. But San Francisco was in the news constantly for almost a year trying to come to terms with this very issue. And then I think some of the cities in Texas had a hard time getting around to figuring it out. But yeah, like I said, you nailed it. Every city is going to have a different approach necessarily here in this state.
yeah, this is not just unique to Georgia. This is this is indeed a global issue, and countries. I've looked up what other countries have done to address this. So it's at the city level, the state level, and indeed now the national level. Thank you. That's all we have for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Andrew McConnell.
Thank you all for having me. Andrew McConnell from Runit.com. We're a company based here in Atlanta. We connect owners of properties with short-term rental managers for those properties so that you don't have owners doing it themselves, but you actually have professional companies doing that. I'm heartened to see that everybody here seems to want somewhat the same thing, reasonable regulation, right? There probably should be some taxation, probably should be some kind of oversight and regulation. I'm less heartened by the fear mongering that we also hear, because there's never been a rock star to trash a hotel room and throw a party in a hotel that spills out into the street, or nobody's ever hated their neighbor or the parties that they've thrown. It's only short-term rental guests that do that. So I think it's funny that all problems must be coming from short-term rentals, because those problems never existed before. I think the one thing we can definitely agree on is, from the numbers given from 12 billion to 31, there's a huge demand from guests. There's a huge demand from property owners for this. And so what we're hearing from some of the vested interests is very similar to the music industry when the internet started becoming popular and Napster started coming around of, let's go kill this thing. And they did. They killed Napster. And now they get to negotiate with Amazon and Apple and Spotify, because consumers had already voted that this was something they wanted. And I think the world's already seeing that. The guests and the people who own the properties want this. And if you put in regulations and legislation that's too onerous, you kind of force people to become criminals. There were a lot of people that were illegally streaming music until it got solved that, oh, I can pay a monthly fee, or I can go through Spotify and I can access this. And so just think about who people are actually trying to protect, and does that protect them? You know, there's some instances where the proposed solution is far worse than the disease. Anaheim is a good example if you want to learn lessons from other cities, where the lobby, and specifically Disney, was opening a new resort. So they lobbied to ban short-term rentals, and they did, and asset prices tanked. And so all these owners and investors who had bought properties in this market that had Disneyland and was a popular rental destination, all of a sudden lost a lot of value. And a lot of families that used to be able to take affordable vacations and go rent a house and stay all together now have to go through an overpriced Disney resort. It's not that these rentals even harm the hotels. One, you know, they talked about all the growth of the short-term rental space, but they failed to mention that occupancy rates in hotels are at a 30-year high, that ADRs are up 3%. So everybody's benefiting. The tide is rising, and everybody's benefiting. And having sensible legislation, having sensible regulation that is clear and that's not up in the air, so that a powerful lobbyist like a Disney or a hotel lobby can come into a certain area and have a tyranny of the minority over the others and tank their property values and take away their property rights. It's a pretty dangerous thing to just leave it to let every municipality or every county come up with their own rules. So I think there's certainly some good lessons to learn from what others have done poorly on that front. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Andrew. You must have done a good job. No questions. Next, let's see. Who's next? Carrie Sikanoff? Did I say that right?
Oh, Katie Sikanoff?
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't read the writing here. And then after you, Katie, we will have Jerry Lawler.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Katie Sikanoff, and I'm the Director of State and Local Government Affairs at the Asian American Hotel Owners Association. And today, I wanted to share a story with you. And this is a story that is familiar to everyone in this room. And it's the idea that no matter who you are, no matter where you came from, if you are willing to work hard, you will find opportunities for success. And so our story starts 30 years ago in India, where Asian Americans saw a great opportunity in the United States in owning and operating hotels. And so, leaving everything familiar behind, they moved to America to start a new livelihood for their families. But as everyone knows, starting a new business is never easy, and especially starting a new business in a brand new, unfamiliar country is incredibly difficult. And so they face discrimination, primarily from the insurance industry and the banking industry. And so some forward-thinking hoteliers in the state of Georgia started an organization called the Asian American Hotel Owners Association. And the mission of our association is to help these small businesses, family-owned businesses, succeed and thrive. And today, AHOA represents 18,000 hoteliers nationwide. We're headquartered in Sandy Springs here in Georgia. We have about 800 members in Georgia, and about 77 members are represented by this committee today. But what I want everyone to really think about is about this story, the most important part is that these hardworking hoteliers are able to create a livelihood for their families, and they can pass that down to generations to come. And I think if you had to ask any of our members some common themes about their success, it really comes down to a couple of points. The first is that you work hard. The second is that you compete and you innovate. You realize that the market is always changing and you do your best to compete. And then the third is that you play by the rules, that you comply with taxes and regulations and fees, no matter how difficult or burdensome. And I think most importantly, the thing that they would tell you today is that they are not afraid of competition, that competition is a hallmark of our industry, that our members are constantly looking for ways to improve their product and to offer the best experience possible to their guests. And a lot of our members even compete against their own family members and friends for business. And so competition is a hallmark of our industry, and it makes us stronger. And most importantly, we support home sharing. But I think there's an important distinction to be made today between an individual, a homeowner, renting out a room in his residence versus a commercial operator owning and renting out several properties. And according to a recent study by CBRE Hotels, over 1.8 billion of Airbnb's revenue came from commercial operators renting out 2 or more home units. And so at that point, that's not traditional home sharing, but more of a lodging business, similar to what our members do. And so today, the most important thing is to have a level playing field for all lodging businesses, whether you're a commercial operator or a hotelier. There should be a level playing field that all lodging businesses need to abide by. Because I think as the story as AHOA shows, that no matter who you are or where you come from, the lodging industry provides great opportunities for success. And a level playing field will make sure that those opportunities are available for generations to come. So again, thank you so much for your time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I don't see any questions.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, Terry Lawler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Terry Lawler, and I'm the president of the Greene County Chamber of Commerce. For those who are not familiar with Greene County, we're a little over halfway between Atlanta and Augusta and are bisected by I-20. We are at the heart of Georgia's Lake Country. We are home to Lake Oconee and the birthplace of Mercer University. Greene County is also known for Reynolds Lake Oconee and the Lake Oconee Ritz-Carlton Hotel, one of the most visited Ritz-Carltons in their hotel chain. Our population growth rate and per capita income both exceed those of the state of Georgia. We have numerous festivals and special events throughout the county, and our own Oconee Brewing Company produces the craft beer for the Cloister on Sea Island, as well as the Georgia Redcoat Marching Band. Greene County is also home to over 110 holes of golf, making it a destination location for golf enthusiasts from all over the world. Our restaurants are also world-renowned, such as the Yesterday Cafe, who served up their delicious buttermilk pie to Carrie Underwood's wedding, which was also held in Greene County. We have numerous bed and breakfast locations, as well as hotel chains and short-term rentals to serve the needs of those who visit our beautiful county. I wanted to give you this background so you could see how unique Greene County is. Other destinations in Georgia are also unique, whether they are Augusta with the Masters, Helen with their Oktoberfest, Glenn County with their Shrimp and Grits festivals, Savannah with their world-famous St. Patrick's Day celebration, Camilla with their Nat Days, or Blue Ridge with their Scenic Railroad and Mountain Festivals. Each community is unique and as a tourist destination and unique in their food and lodging options. Being as close as we are to Augusta and located on Lake Oconee, you can imagine the impact the Masters and boating and fishing and recreation has on our hotels, bed and breakfast, and short-term rental properties. Because of the impact of short-term rentals in our community, our county commissioners spent an exhaustive, multi-year effort designing a short-term rental ordinance for our county. Adopting the ordinance required a long and sometimes heated debate, but we did finally adopt an ordinance. I would venture a guess that our ordinance, while it may work in Greene County, would probably not work in Augusta. And it probably wouldn't suffice in Brunswick, Savannah, Blue Ridge, or many other communities throughout Georgia. Each of our communities are unique, which require locally developed policies to address each community's short-term rental particulars. As you read and hear testimony from the witnesses during this study committee, I hope you will remember that every Georgia community is distinctive. Attempting to design a short-term rental policy at the state level will be difficult, universally unworkable, and politically divisive. I urge you to respect the home rule of Georgia's cities and counties and not recommend transferring such authority to the state where decision makers are not knowledgeable of the specific characteristics of each Georgia community that they take into consideration when they adopt local ordinances on short-term rental properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry, can you tell us a little bit about the Greene County ordinance?
Right, as you heard earlier, we have an overlay district, so the whole county is not under the short-term rental area. The county commissioners look at an area, primarily we're talking about the gated communities that are on the lake, and they set up an overlay district for zoning purposes that you could then have rental properties, short-term rental properties within that. But even one thing that wasn't mentioned is that we have a sunset provision in there that requires even after 5 years, we've got to go back and have another public hearing again and look at whether or not we even continue to have that zoning overlay district that allows short-term rentals within that particular area.
So then it's only specifically addressed to these gated communities, which can be what, anywhere from 2 to what, 10 homes? How many?
Reynolds Lake Oconee, I think, has about 1,800, maybe over 2,000 units in that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the whole gated community ends up being in the overlay district. You have to have 60% of the property owners within the overlay district that agree to be in the overlay district. So in theory, you could have an overlay district that ran as a ribbon, obviously along the lake, or you could have it as a large tract of land if there were houses, let's say, along a golf course area that might be rented out on a short-term rental process. So it ends up being unique even within the community as to what those districts would actually look like. So that, again, that's why we keep talking about the need to have, instead of having the state say this is exactly how it has to be, we're just so unique with Lake Oconee, with Reynolds Plantation and the other gated communities, as well as rentals that go up and down the lake that require this type of focus, where obviously some other places don't even have a lake that they're dealing with. I think someone said earlier, they're up in the mountains, they're running across a ridge. Total different type of atmosphere within the community.
And what are some of the what are some of the advantages, like, because we're trying to figure this out. What are some of the advantages that you've heard, and what are some of the I guess the negatives? What is the feedback that y'all have gotten on this?
As you can imagine, representing the Chamber of Commerce, I have members who are on both sides of this issue. And so to try to come up with something I could come and tell you all as to what we could agree with as a group is what you just heard there. There are those who support short-term rentals and want to have actually more of those. There are others who are purely property rights, that if I want to do it, I can. If I don't want to do it, that's my choice. We've got, obviously ordinances that deal with noise and everything else, and you can call the sheriff out for that. But the thing I heard mostly from folks on both sides is if they don't like what the ordinance is, then they've always got the county commissioners to go back to. And again, this is a county at our level. And if they don't like it, they can vote them out. And I've heard that from both sides, both those who support the ordinance and those who are opposed to it. They just feel that the uniqueness of the community gives them the ability to have comments and change it as time goes on and we see what happens, versus the fear of if the state gets into it and you get too much into the weeds, then it may make it very difficult for us to regulate it within the community. Things like the public safety issues and whether you're changing linens and stuff like that, that's not the real concern. And I heard some people mentioning that to there. That's not what really concerns folks. It's the ability, if something were done incorrectly up here and you all are no longer here, like I was here years and years ago and things have now been changed since I've been up here. That's what I think bothers them more, is if we see something happens in Greene County that's a problem, there might not be a majority of y'all up here that see that as a problem, and there may not be the desire to change the legislation because they don't understand what we're doing in Greene County.
Okay. You do have a few questions. I think Spencer, Representative Fry, you were the first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Red Coat Marching Band, craft beer. So.
I love that place where you're talking about. It's a bunch of great places. I got a couple questions about your overlay districts and how you
I'll
did
try
that.
to answer them as best I can.
So, what was the big problem that you were trying to solve by creating these overlay districts in the area?
The problem was just what you all have been hearing up here. You would have some neighbor complaining about someone else's neighbor. There are people who would basically rent their house only during the Masters. We're the closest decent-sized city to Augusta, so people would rent it out for that 1 week, and that's all they would ever do it. That's the only reason they did it. And then you would have other folks, though, who were doing it what you all would call typical short-term rental, and they may rent out their lake property off and on to different people during the summer months where they come down and use the lake. So we got a lot of back and forth on complaints about the lake folks that were renting it out, that you never would have the same person week after week after week. Then you had the other folks say, hands off, we're only dealing with once a week, and it's my relatives or it's friends that I know. Typically, Masters folks, when they come and rent things, they don't trash the place because they want to be able to come back. You all know what they charge to rent hotel rooms in Augusta during the Masters. So if you find a place, you're not going to trash it. So you get those folks that say, leave us alone, it's 1 week out of year. Then you get the other folks who say, we need something to be done to deal with these folks that are coming on the weekend and throwing their fraternity parties or whatever else happens to be.
I have a couple follow-ups. So, did you create a carve-out for that Masters Week for the individuals that were not taking advantage of the issue?
If you do it a day or longer, you're supposed to register with the county. So instead of me telling you with any certainty of that, I'd rather get back with you and answer that question direct because I know that's an important question. That was part of the debate. Initially, there was a lot of debate. If it was less than 5 days, you didn't have to register. But the ordinance, as I remember when it was finally passed, said if it was a day or longer, then you did at least have to register with the county.
So you are requiring people who rent out their homes to register a rental?
To my knowledge, that's correct. If you are in the overlay district,
What if you're not?
then you're not covered under this because that's the whole issue is that we're trying to regulate the short-term rentals in the overlay versus somebody who has a fishing cabin up at the upper end of the lake, almost in Oconee County when they're really just renting it out part-time and there's no one around them because they're on a 50-acre farm. I mean,
Okay,
you get
so-
into that back and forth.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my head around it. So you're only trying to regulate the specific overlay district. Everything outside the overlay district can do what they want
That's
right
correct.
now.
That's my understanding. That's correct.
And one last follow-up. Yes. Who owns those properties in the overlay districts that you're regulating? Are they majority primary residences, or are they owned by specific investors that have come in to try to utilize this ordinance as an investment rather than a home?
It's a mix. I can't say it's one or the other. There are all those types. All the above, I guess, is the answer to that.
And then how many properties are located in these overlay districts?
I would have to get back with you on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just so that we're clear, the overlay district, if you're not within the overlay district, there is no regulation.
That's my understanding, correct.
Okay.
When you read the ordinance, that's where everything is tied to that overlay district, and all the regulations and everything about reporting and registering are all in that overlay district.
And again, sorry to pummel you with so many
No, that's
questions.
fine.
But this is a good opportunity, I think, for the committee to kind of get some ideas of what a local government specifically is doing. I think we're going to have a lot of questions for the city of Savannah.
Yeah.
What does the city do to monitor this or police this, or what are the consequences if you are not following the rules and this sort of, how is it enforced?
Mr. Chairman, I'll have to get that back with you because I can't answer that with any certainty. I'll ask one of my county commission friends and the sheriff as to what they go about.
Okay. That's fair.
It's a
Thank
good
you.
question, but that's important.
Thank you. Terry, how would you know in Greene County, just outside of the owner-occupied home that has filed for a homestead exemption, that decided to start going into the business, and of course you wouldn't know, I guess, as a county if they were living there or not. How would you know that that person might not go and buy a home in Savannah and rent that one out and is homesteaded? And of course, as you know, we freeze property taxes in about 65 districts, taxing districts around the state. That's any answers there?
No, because frankly, that's the challenge that we're dealing with in Greene County, because we have a lot of people who have, this is their second or third home. And with the census coming up, and I know this is something y'all are going to be looking at, a lot of the folks who want to retire to Greene County, but if they don't count their Greene County resident as their census resident, then we don't get counted for all the funds that flow through with that. So you've brought up a very good issue that we're trying to deal with, is how do we get recognized for the fact we've got all this need for infrastructure, but that may be their second or third home, because they do have a place in Savannah. We have a lot of folks from Savannah that come up. They like to have the lake life along with the advantages of being in Savannah.
And I'll ask Larry that question in Savannah, so just go ahead and plant
Get
that
ready.
one.
Representative Drenner?
I had some similar questions as my colleagues, and I would also like to say that I love that area as well. In DeKalb,
We love your money found very much. Thank you.
And you know, I don't mind coming down and spending it there.
Thank you.
We have overlay districts in DeKalb, and I also had an enforcement question. You answered my question about registering. I'm wondering, do you generate revenue from the registration process?
I believe there's a nominal fee to register, but the revenue that would come from is through the hotel motel. That they would have to charge a hotel motel tax on that area there. That's if any real revenue would be coming from would be there.
So it's almost like they get they in the overlay district, they get a business license, and then they are treated more like a hotel.
That's my understanding. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
That's all the questions. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, and I'll get back with y'all to answer those questions that you raised.
Okay, thank
great.
you. All right. Who did I say was next? Or did I say? I did not say. Jeff Ledford. I know he's here. I saw him. There he is. Okay, Jeff, and then after that, have Gary Knight.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. Excuse me. Jeff Ledford with the Realtors. You know, we've heard a few things here today, and I think some of the concerns we have, we've been a part of many of these local discussions on the ordinances and the needs for ordinances, and very much so in Greene County. I think we spent about 3 years working with them on trying to get the ordinance that wasn't in violation of the rental registry code. That's Title 367430, I think, if you're looking for it. And we heard that referenced as that was done under a different context and isn't relevant to this. And I would argue that's very different, very different way to look at it. Originally, it did come to pass because the registries were being created to kind of push out the wrong type of people in communities, and it was more of a fair housing issue. And that's why we stepped in to help get that in place years ago. And that's very much what's happening now. With regard to Greene County, I do believe, from my recollection working on it, that outside of the overlay districts, it's actually prohibited to have one of these now. And one of the concerns is we had a number of our members that worked with people outside of that district or those districts, and they're going to have trouble now retiring to the little cabin that they bought so that they could retire. And these are low-income people, or people that are not able to buy in the gated communities, but your everyday person, someone that has been able to put away a little cash and buy this little cabin, buy this little house so they could retire to the country, and their retirements are shot now. We have individuals, there's one of our members has her brother living with her right now while he's waiting for an organ transplant. And the way he's able to maintain and keep his house is by having it as a short-term rental. And so if this is banned on that lake where he lives, he'd lose his home. These are anecdotal. I know these are kind of unique, but we also hear about these party houses, and there are laws in place that address that. There are nuisance ordinances. Specifically with Greene County, that was one of the first arguments we heard. We pulled 3 years' worth of 911 calls to the sheriff, and we didn't find that to be the case, that there was an inordinate amount of noise violations. In fact, more owners probably were in violation of noise ordinances than the rentals were. Our take on this, we understand with the tax side of it, with anything that can be done. Obviously, Airbnb, when I go stay in other states and different ones, they can collect those taxes, and that's something that we're not opposed to. What we are concerned about is your core fundamental bundle of rights, your ability to use your property and your private property rights that you have with that. This is not something that is on par with competing with hotels. This is something that most of these are someone able to make a little extra money by renting out their house. We also have heard a lot about these as recreational, with the masters, with going on vacation. And that's great. And there are a lot of people that use that. I do that myself. But I think you're going to find there's a whole lot more of these that are near hospitals, cancer treatment centers, near military bases, so that families can be with their loved ones when they're going through training, used for corporate transitions, all kinds of things. Just in a day-to-day, and we don't normally talk about the transactional side of our business, but my in-laws, when they bought their house, their other home wasn't ready yet. They hadn't closed on that one. It's a hot market, so they had to do a lease back on their house they were selling. That would be prohibited with many of the ordinances that we're seeing. So when local governments put these in place, some of the first things we see when we're working with them each time is violation of Georgia's rental registry law. We see that it would kick out the lease backs that are just a common part of a real estate transaction. We see problems where the film industry is one of the fastest growing industries in the state. I think 7.2 billion of late. Greene County is right next to Tolliver, and at one time I think that was probably our hub of film activity in Georgia, back with some Hallmark films and stuff. But I know going back about 20, 30 years ago, they were starting there. But in each one of these counties, you're essentially kicking out that industry if you put in some of what has been put in on their first drafts, because it just whole out bans them. And speaking of all out bans, I think Morgan County is one down near Lake Oconee, where you had I think our first Georgia citizen served jail time for having a short-term rental. So our argument is these are getting a little out of hand. One of the first drafts of the Greene County, my family wouldn't have been able to stay there. You got a cap on how many surnames could be in a house. And so I think when you have these coming in, you don't have a lot of the oversight that you do in your position. So yes, I could go back to my county if I feel something needs to be changed. But we've seen that be the case in certain instances where it was done for a reason of pushing someone out, much like the original rental registry ban that we had put in place in Georgia was because that local jurisdiction knowingly was oppressing and pushing someone out. So that's what we'd like to offer with this.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, Gary Knight.
Hello, my name is Gary Knight, and I'm a property owner, and I own a cabin rental business in Blue Ridge, Georgia. And I know y'all will be responsible in drafting this legislation. I spoke with Debbie Jackson in the commissioner's office at Fannin County. We register each property owner so that the county can then talk to them about the hotel motel tax and paying those, and I am all for that. As a property owner and as a business owner, we've been in Blue Ridge for about 15 years, and it started with one cabin. We built it as a second home, and it's turned into a business now. where I own 10 homes that are in our rental program. I had a home here in Fulton County, and we just sold it. The speaker that was here before, he said some really important things, because I know that we've had cancer patients at our house in Atlanta. I know that in Fannin County, we get lots of people that come up, stay in our cabins. They have this wonderful experience, and then they become property owners. Second home, or now more and more, where they're permanent property owners. And I'll be happy to answer any question if you have any questions as a property owner and as a vacation second home short-term rental company. We require our owners, I will say, I've listened to a lot of the comments. We require our owners to have liability insurance. It's $1 million per, with a $2 million aggregate. We're very hands-on in, I own a lot of large houses that have a lot of folks that up to say 12 or 14, and we charge by the guest. So if there's 4 guests, after 4 guests, it's $25 per person per night, as a way to really know who's in our houses, and we don't rent our houses out by the home just so that anybody can come. Where y'all can really help a lot is helping these counties register private property owners, so that they will then pay their hotel motel tax, their occupancy tax, and I'm all for that. We were going to purchase in Greene County last year. As a matter of fact, we started making trips, but then once I read their legislation through their county commissioners, we decided not to purchase properties there so that we could do the same thing we did in Fannin County, because I just found it too onerous. And I think that having the state do some sort of permitting and then getting people, the individual property owners, responsible to pay their lodging tax, I think is a really good idea. I hope you don't do anything that hurts the tourism in Georgia. It's like I said, we see it all the time. People come, they stay at our cabins, they love our cabins. There's been members of your committee that have actually stayed in our cabins, and they want to own. And then they come back up and they own. And I think that's great all the way across the state. So.
Chairman Stevens?
Gary, wouldn't you agree that you just don't have the hotel capacity in your area for certain things, like when you do a movie there? I know a little bit about the movie industry. And and if you were to have certain festivals there, there's just not a hotel capacity to handle all these folks.
Well, there isn't, and I think the hotels can live side by side with. As a matter of fact, I know that that's actually happening, where hotels are trying to set up. I saw it in Arizona and Scottsdale, where they're setting up little cottages and houses as well as their hotels. But we don't have the capacity. But in the end, I think it's also part of just, private property rights. If owners don't want that in a certain community, then they can, through their homeowners association, they can tackle that problem. We don't have the problems that I hear about at all, but mainly it's about folks understanding that they've got to pay their occupancy tax.
Would you hit on the issue again of insurance? You mentioned that a little bit, that you carry over and above on your liability side.
We do, actually. There are companies in the industry that Proper Insure is one of them, CSA, I believe, that they're commercial type insurance programs, and they will sell this to the owners, and it's $1 million per occurrence with a $2 million aggregate. It's in our property management agreement.
Okay, thank you.
No.
That's all the questions I see. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
And I didn't see who's next, did I can't make out the name, but I have a Steve. It looks like with the boat club. How do you spell it? Guello. Oh, okay. Could have sworn that was a K.
And hello, how's everybody doing? Okay. I'm on Lake Lanier, and I am president of North Georgia Boating Club. On our lake, we have come to the conclusion, our boat club members, that the county has made a very strong effort to eliminate all short-term rentals on the lake, which leaves us, in our county specifically, but other counties on the lake are also very limited, which leaves only one place, Lake Lanier Island Resort. And the resort isn't accommodating to boating. Their whole goal is to keep everybody in the resort so the rest of the lake, and they can spend their money there, basically. And so the issues we have are, if our county becomes successful, and we question their motivation simply because we don't see the troubles and the noises that they're speaking of and that type of thing. We do see very wealthy, influential people that have made a permanent residence on the lake that decide that they really want to control the public lands behind their house and limit access and that type of thing. But we're in a situation where if the county is successful doing what they say they're going to do by changing our Uniform Development Code, is the fact that we will have zero lakeside lodging. So it puts the boating community in a situation to where you go to the boat ramp, you put the boat in, and you're out for 48 hours because you're there for the weekend, or you're trailering back and forth to the Holiday Inn or that type of thing. But eliminating all the lakeside lodging, we feel, is extremely dangerous, because we feel safe boating is done in smaller doses. Go out for a morning ski run, come back to the vacation home, the lake house that you rented for the week, and recover, have breakfast, have lunch, go back out for a second run. So in essence, what attracted many of our members to the Forsyth County area is the fact that we could utilize and enjoy the lake. So a lake house with a boat dock creates an environment where people can enjoy their family, can enjoy their friends, go out and enjoy boating, come back home safely. And some of the takeaways from our county commissioner meetings are kind of, I don't know, it just seems like if somebody wants the privacy and the quiet and not to be exposed to different people every other weekend, maybe they should buy in a community with covenants, and maybe they should not purchase a lot on public lands that they're sharing, where their backyard is the general public, basically. So when you leave it in the hands of the local county commissioners, and many times you end up with ulterior motives, we have 2.5 times the amount of deaths on Lake Lanier as any other lake its size when you make the comparisons. And I submitted to our county commission that maybe that's because we don't promote safe boating. Maybe it's because people can't go out on the lake, so and spend some quality time and that type of thing. The mantra of the county was, well, we got to get a handle on this because we have twice as many short-term rentals as we did the year before and twice as many as we did the year before. Very coincidentally, the death toll has gone down and gone down and gone down. So safe boating is important, and we feel strongly about that. And for a county to go as far as to remove all lodging from their shorelines on public lands that they're caretakers of, hurts a lot of people in different ways, and I'm just sharing my thoughts because it's kind of out of bounds from what everybody's talking about.
Okay, you have one question?
Sure.
I seem to be grabbing the mic. I'm not a mic hog, I promise. How would this affect the houseboats on Lake Lanier? Because they rent those short term as well.
They do not. As far as my knowledge of the houseboat rental, they do
Weekend
houseboat
rentals.
parties out of Lake Lanier Islands, and
The marinas?
the marinas do not do houseboat rentals. As a matter of fact, if somebody in a marina tries to rent their house on a houseboat out, they're told that the Corps is going to come down on them. And the one outfit that did short-term rentals of houseboats, which was Paradise Boat Rental, has discontinued that because, and they sold all their boats, and they may have one or two left. And I don't want to make it this, but I was told that they were just bringing the wrong kind of people up for those short-term rentals on the houseboat, so they decided to get out of it, even though it was lucrative. We're pushed out of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't want to muddy the water, literally, but the idea that, of course, I live on the water in Savannah, and there's folks down there that rent their boats for weekends, and they use it as a rental, a short-term rental. So I'm wondering where we begin to cross that line.
Well, yeah, they're not allowed to do that on Lake Lanier. My boat club owns boats, and our members share the boats, and we're able to package them with vacation rental homes and that type of thing that various people have available. And I also have a vacation rental home.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, just for just the benefit of the committee and those here, we will be addressing a short-term vehicle rental. Short-term rental, we're going to be looking at vehicles because in the last, I think, in the last year, it's really become quite popular. So to your point, Chairman Stevens, that might be a good time to hear from those folks who do the boat rentals. Okay, next, Jason, is it Stair? Yeah, okay. Jason, and then after that, Donna Bellamy.
Good afternoon. I'm a host. My name is Jason Sterner. Our first property is in Sugar Hill, Georgia, North Gwinnett County. And my background has been 15 years in the hospitality industry in corporate America, and did a lot of travel in my time, a lot of travel away from my family. And so my primary purpose was to gain some of my time back by getting into doing a short-term rental on our own property. We started about a year ago in December. I have a wife and 5 children, so I like to spend time with them. We love serving people, and this gives us the ability to serve families traveling to the area from all over the world. We primarily serve families traveling to the area to celebrate weddings, milestone birthdays, funerals, and special events. In fact, we have a family of 13 arriving in just a few minutes to celebrate a family member's wedding locally tonight. Hotels are not big enough to serve families that want to be in community and rent a place together, just like going to the beach. Hotels continue to become an expensive alternative for large families to cram into a large room. We know that from our own personal experience. There are no hotels within a 7-mile radius of my short-term rental, so we serve people who want to be local, want to stay local. The Airbnb platform hosts 2 million people a day worldwide. The Vice President of Community for Airbnb claims that out of all of those stays, only 0.002% escalate to getting authorities involved. This is apparent. It is not a regular occurrence worldwide. Having a short-term rental also allows me to spend more time with my own family, making an income to support us. My older kids are homeschooled. All of my kids are homeschooled, but my older 2 kids help clean the house between guests to earn extra money. It's truly a small family business for us. It allows me to teach my kids firsthand a great work ethic. That's very rewarding to us. We also travel, and when we do, we have a cleaning team that we treat like family, and a local maintenance person to look after our home. We also get to provide income opportunities to these small family-owned local businesses in the Sugar Hill area. The ability to provide for our family and other local families is a very fulfilling part of this business. We've also found families that want to stay in homes feel like they're staying in a home away from home. They don't. They want to have that homey feel, and so I also have some other properties as well, and I teach and consult on Airbnb good practices, and have a boot camp I'm teaching actually this Saturday. So I'm an advocate for homeowners to be able to start small businesses, and I believe it's the backbone of America. And to be able to have that right is very important to all of us that have small businesses in the room. I think deep in the root of all of it, we want to comply to legislation, and we want to work with paying taxes and doing other things that are necessary for the economic value in the area that we serve. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm kind of, I've spoken with dozens, if not hundreds of hosts, either by phone or email. This is a very personally important topic to a lot of folks. How many properties do you yourself own that you operate?
I currently run 2 with 4 more starting this month.
Okay. And are any of those your primary residence?
Yes, the first one is my primary residence.
Okay. So you do take a homestead exemption on that property. Okay. And you said, and what taxes are you paying on both those properties?
Sugar Hill and our other property does not require taxes at this point. But we are welcome to pay them if they're enforced or whenever they're enacted.
Okay.
I mean, certainly we're paying property tax.
Yeah, I've gotten different reports, but it's my understanding that people operating short-term rentals are supposed to be, like Airbnb, are supposed to be collecting hotel motel tax. That's not really the case. That's actually being done. And you mentioned Airbnb. What other platforms do you utilize in filling these properties?
That's the only primary platform that I use at this point.
All right. Well, that's all the questions I have. Any others? We have one more.
Question as a homeowner. Of course, I've got a condominium here in Atlanta that is several of the folks have come in and turned those into short-term rentals. Some of those we found out didn't change the sheets, and so now we have a bed bug problem that's within our, basically separated by walls. I'm sure you changed the sheets in yours, and
Yep.
no
every
big
time.
issues.
Every time. We've had over 200 people in our Sugar Hill residence in the last 10 months, and we've not had one issue.
I guess where we're going is, where does the state have a stake at all, or the locals have a stake at all in shared properties, if you will, like condominiums? Do you have an opinion on that?
Where should the state be involved? Is that the question?
Or even the locals when it comes to things like, we regulate pools and how often they're tested and that kind of stuff. Any opinion?
I mean, my opinion would be, I guess, property owners should, at a high level, have either some kind of training or, I always teach people or tell people, treat it like a business, right? Treat other people like you want to be treated. That's the golden rule, right? So if I'm going to go, I have a pool and a hot tub at our house, and it gets treated by a professional on a regular basis. It gets winterized, whatever needs to happen to it. And so it is treated, with a high level of, hospitality and customer service to people, because I would want the same thing coming to their house. And I always ask my guests, hey, tell me what I can do better, and give me feedback. And if you've found something wrong, I'll either refund money or I'll make it right. So we lead at a high level.
So in your business, do you have a business license?
I do.
Okay, and so you pay business taxes on your rentals.
Yep.
Okay.
It's under an LLC.
All right. That's all the questions I have. Thank you. I will add that Airbnb was asked to participate in this meeting and in this process, and they are not here. I feel that that needs to be said. We would like for them to be here. I have a lot of questions for them. They are a large part of this conversation, and I think that they are letting folks like you down and their other hosts by not being a part of this process up to this point. Those of you that are here that use it, I would encourage them to be a partner in this process. So next, I think we had Donna Bellamy.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I am a flight attendant of 16 years. I'm actually a homeowner, and I got into owning or having an Airbnb by default. My family grew. We were looking for an opportunity to move elsewhere, but of course, before we can move, we needed to sell our current property, which was a townhome that we've grown out of. Prior to doing so, I did an appraisal because I wanted to make sure that I can get the monies for the property and not owe, not being able to sell and pay it off. And it turned out that the appraisal did come back lower than what my actual loan was. So I did not want to do that. I did not want to be left having to pay on a property that I didn't own. We also own property in Des Moines, and at the same time that we considered getting rid of our property in Atlanta that we lived in, we had a rental in Des Moines that was totally trashed. Had to come out of our personal pockets, about $10,000 to get that property back in, get it back in shape, and we're still right now debating whether we're gonna rent it out again or sell it. So we haven't decided. But how the Airbnb came about is because we did not want to have a long-term rental. We didn't want to go back into that with everything else that had gone on. So it came to my understanding. I talked to a few people about short-term rental. I was very concerned about doing a short-term rental because I take pride in my properties, and I had heard stories about people partying, and I absolutely did not want that to happen. So in looking at the Airbnb platform, I noticed that they had a whole lot of restrictions. They were very conservative in their platform in terms of how they set their properties up. So I became interested. I found myself a super host to assist to make sure I did this properly. I've since moved out. We've changed our homeowner's insurance to, as indicated earlier, into a liability insurance with $1 million with a $2 million aggregate. We've refurnished the entire place. All in all, we spent about $8,500 getting the property ready. $2,000 of which went to one contractor to clean and paint the entire place. Another $2,000, actually it was $2,500 to redo our floors. We had all of our electrical, everything electrical service and inspected. We had our plumbing service and inspected. We had our HVAC service and inspected, because what I did not want to have happen is for someone to come into my home and have any issues. I didn't want to have any issues of potential fires or anything like that. So we took every precaution necessary, and turns out once we got the property ready, within a matter of 5 days, we got someone to stay at the property. And ironically, the person that stayed at the property was, I guess she got another job. She was from Ohio, and she got relocated to Atlanta. Well, surprisingly, 25 years ago, I got relocated, and I was in a hotel for 2 months. And I don't know about any of you guys, but I stay in hotels for a living. And it's not necessarily someplace you want to be. It's not necessarily someplace you want to call home. It creates a lot of anxiety. So being able to open my home to someone where they can go through this transition and be comfortable gives me a lot of pride. To avoid bed bugs, we did a termite inspection. All of our beds, we have waterproof mattresses. We have cleaning crews, you know, and we have the ability to still go in and check. I take pride in my property. I don't have parties. I'm not a party person. I don't allow parties. It's a part of the rules that we have. We don't allow smoking. And the only reason why we don't allow dogs is because of the community that it's in. We just don't want dogs roaming all over the place. Personally, I use Airbnbs. I have a dog. Not many hotels in the places that I go to will allow us to bring dogs. I've been to Savannah many times. I enjoy Airbnbs. I like going somewhere where I feel like I'm at home. I like being somewhere where I'm not crowded with a whole bunch of people. I stay in hotels for a living. I don't want to do hotels when I'm on my personal time. So taking away or putting limitations and or restrictions on short-term rentals, I get the regulations, I'm all for it, but I think we just need to be a little bit more open-minded about it in terms of where the demand is, what the demand is. There is a not just need for it, but there's a demand for it, and it's going to happen. We just need to figure out how to work together to make it happen to where everybody is benefiting. And that's pretty much all I have to say.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, right now we'll have Nori Smith, and then the next person, I can't read the first name, but the last name I'm pretty sure is Barnes. And what's your first name? Claire, okay. Claire Barnes.
Hi, so I host here in Atlanta in a neighborhood right below here called Mechanicsville. And if you're familiar with the areas below I-20, we've suffered from decades of disinvestment, and these neighborhoods were full of abandoned homes, and some neighborhoods had as little as 30% occupancy. And I bring that up because we're constantly talking about how short-term rental owners are taking away housing for local Atlanta residents when we have neighborhoods that are fully available for people to come and move into. But short-term rentals produce cost-effective options to tourists. They provide revenue to support our local neighborhood businesses, and on south of I-20, that's very important for us. And it provides extra income for the working class. So many of my colleagues in my own co-working space, I can give you some personal accounts to how Airbnb has been able to give them a significant financial boost. Kendra and Chad, Summer Hill residents, they are paying their mortgage every month on a house they live in through Airbnb. Myray operates an international shipping and fulfillment center in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is one of those impoverished neighborhoods that I'm talking about. She was able to build that business because of Airbnb, able to lease out her home and not have to have a regular full-time job. And also Katrina, who unfortunately, due to unemployment this year, has spent most of the year with her home teetering on the edge of foreclosure. She lives in Sylvan Hills. With the increased cost of living here and with higher property taxes, like I just got a huge hit for property taxes this year. We are constantly faced with affordability and displacement challenges, and for many of our local residents, short-term rentals has been the answer. As a small business owner myself, I know that Airbnb oftentimes has been the difference in keeping my head above water. This year alone, just to talk about the type of host that I am, I'm hosted the film crews for the Georgia-Alabama National Championship game. I've hosted BET employees for Afropunk Fest. I've hosted a crew from Australia that came up here to work booths at DragonCon, and multiple times this year hosted exhibitors for America's Mart. In fact, I've got America's Mart people checking out today. And as we know, these conventions as a collective help to drive our economy here in Atlanta. And sometimes I have families, plenty of times I have families that come through. For instance, a particular guest of mine, Dee, she is in a family of 6, and this is their first family vacation together because normally they can't afford to travel. And sometimes I go through and I look at the prices that these hotels are charging for the night. It easily gets up to $400. What are the workers of these conventions going to do? What are these families that would like to take part in things that go on in Atlanta? What are all them going to do? So, I say that to say that we talk about leveling the playing field. We're not after the same guests. So I am part of a group of thoughtful homeowners who have decreased crime in our neighborhoods because we have more eyes on the street, and we've improved the perception of our area greatly. Airbnb is completely review-based. So we have to make sure not only our house is presentable, but also the drive on the way in. I personally get out there and pick up trash if the neighborhood is bad. And I know that I can say that about plenty of the other owners in my area. My neighbors are supportive of what I'm doing. And my guests love my neighbors, and they say it in the reviews. I am very intentional about my property, just because I heard that discussed just a minute ago. It went under a complete $40,000 renovation, hardwoods throughout. I work really hard to prevent germs. And also, my mattresses are brand new and zipped up with vinyl. No bed bugs. And the last thing is that, on sites like this, it's completely review-based. So I not only have to make sure that my house is clean and presentable, but I have to make sure they have a great perception of the area and Atlanta as a whole. So I just hope that we consider those things and how individual owners like myself go above and beyond to make sure these guests have an overall great experience and come back to Atlanta.
So we have Claire Barnes, and then I have Sue Lee, and then our last, the last name I have, he's not here. The last name I have on the list is Al Webster. Is there anybody else here who has not signed up?
I signed up. It should be on there as Rich Monroe.
Oh, okay. I thought you weren't here. All right, Rich. Then you'll close us out.
Good afternoon. My name is Claire Barnes, and I'm a host in Roswell, the historic district. I'm a super host. And Roswell right now it's depending on y'all to do something to tell their guidelines. There are people in Roswell, and a lot of them that have multiple locations. And I think that where y'all could play is make a difference between, because I've got a carriage house behind my house, between the multiple owners and a single owner operated. And when I did this, I started looking at Frederick, Maryland. We traveled a lot, and Frederick, Maryland has got a real good policy on it requires owner operated. And then when you get out of that owner operated, it goes into a different category of business or owner. It's kind of like if you've got a bunch of rental properties, because I know when you've got a certain number, you're under a different category than if you've got a large number of rentals. Then you have to have different things that you have to comply with. But I would like to see y'all make a difference. If you're going to do it, to make a difference, or guidelines for the communities opposed to the owner-operated and the one that have multiple units. And I think it's great. I don't think one's better than the other. I just think that there needs to be, if they're going to make guidelines, have some type of difference between a single owner-operated that's on the property opposed to one that has multiple locations. But I know the communities are looking to y'all to do guidelines, because that's what Roswell's doing. And Roswell's full of event facilities. Event facilities, the people go to the event, they don't spend any money. With Airbnb, my people spend a lot of money in Roswell because, the event, they go there and they leave. Where with us, they're there the weekend, they take advantage of the restaurants, of everything that's in Roswell. And it's not cheap to do things in Roswell. But anyway, I hope that y'all would make some type of difference between the owner and the one that's got the multiple. I think that would help the communities out there, 'cause that's what Roswell's looking for. Thank you.
So that's not my district, but I'm adjacent to it. I'm just over the county
Right.
line from Roswell, and there are a lot of. I go to several weddings there, and
Right.
right along.
And I do a tremendous amount of
right
weddings.
along Mimosa there. What is the nearest hotel?
Well, there's not one.
Yeah.
It's over on Hokel Bridge Road. But
Uh-huh.
right now we're going to have the boutique hotel.
Yeah.
Which is going to be right there off Canton Street. But it's still not going to fill. But it's going to be extremely expensive.
Are you on Canton Street?
No, I'm right up. I'm off the square. I'm in the
Okay,
historic
you're-
district, right there on
okay.
the square. Right. I've got 800-foot carriage house.
And how many times a year do you say you rent your property? Not nights, but how many times a year do you say you rent it?
About, 15 times. I'm probably about 20 days a month. I'm occupied.
Oh wow, that often.
Right. But it's a lot of tourists, different with functions in Roswell. I do a lot of weddings. Weddings in Roswell are very popular with all the different event facilities. But again, they go to the event and they go home. And when they're staying with me with the bride and groom or the family of the bride or the groom, whatever, they spend a lot of money touring Roswell up to the wedding. So there's a lot of different things that they, into the economy of Roswell.
Okay.
But I know that Roswell's looking for y'all to make some type of guidelines that they're wanting, because they keep putting everybody off. And I do pay taxes. I pay the Fulton County occupancy tax.
Yeah, Roswell is one of the ones that contacted me about.
Right.
All right, Chairman Stevens.
What's a superhost?
A superhost? You said what is it?
And what's the responsibilities? What do they do?
There's certain things criteria you have to meet monthly to maintain that, and reviews are very important on that. So if you get a bad review, you could lose your superhost status, of not being clean or for some, various different reasons.
I understand.
And you're very diligent about maintaining the superhost, which I'm sure most of the Airbnbers, that's something that everybody wants to maintain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to break. Rich, since I skipped over you, you can go next if you like. Okay.
Thank you very much for the committee for putting this forum together and allowing us to have this venue. The question about the superhost, I am actually a superhost as well. I'm a host here in Atlanta. I also have a group of other hosts that we meet monthly to discuss best practices and share ideas and talk about how we can improve what we do. So more specifically, the criteria for superhost. As you know, the Airbnb platform has been quite successful because of the review process. and it's a very big, impactful part of what happens when guests and hosts interact. And Superhosts are, there's about 25% of all the hosts in Georgia are Superhosts. And you have to have a 4.8 rating or above. You have to have a 90% successful response time, so you have to be very responsive in the guest interaction. A lot of what happens is done by messaging on the platform in terms of communication. You have to have hosted at least 10 guests, and you have to have 0 cancellations, so there's a reliability factor there. There's a lot of other platforms, or there's a few other platforms that don't take that as serious, and so you have guests that may have booked something 3 weeks in advance, and then they get canceled on, and they have to make last-minute changes to their trip. So it's something that's very critical. And you know, I know we've talked a lot about different things today. I want to touch on something that we haven't talked about, and I was the one that provided some of the statistics that came directly from Airbnb. I sought them out and asked them because I knew they weren't going to be here today. And I think it's critical that we talk about the statistics. 85% of the listings in Georgia are one home, or one individual home. 9% are 2 listings. And there's 1% of all of the listings that are 10 listings and above. So yes, there are folks that are out there that are doing this as a business and doing multiple listings. There are some of those folks in our group. And I think they welcome, you know, legislation to be clearly defined for, you know, making sure that these ordinances are being followed properly and the taxes are being paid. Airbnb is also anxiously waiting to have that defined. As they've done in other states, once things have been enacted, they help facilitate the payment of those taxes directly to the city and county governments. And it's something from a host perspective that Airbnb does quite well. It's not, you know, there's a reason why they've been successful. Their platform is very specific on the guest side and on the host side. It's been mentioned before, when you list a property, there's certain criteria that you have to follow. You've got to have certain safety features. You have to have a smoke alarm. You have to have a carbon monoxide detector. You have to have, you know, things available for safety. Parties has been talked a lot about. There are very few people that I know of that are hosts, and I know quite a lot of them in Atlanta, that specifically allow parties. Most of our listings, of the folks that we have, they have it very clearly in the details, no parties. And there's quiet time from 10 p.m. at night till 8 a.m. in the morning. We're very conscious of the neighbors. My listing, all my neighbors know how to contact and reach me because they know that I can contact my guests immediately if there's a noise. There's also other things from a technology standpoint. You can get a noise detector. Doesn't record, but it measures the level of sound. And it can give you an automatic text as a host if something's going on. Maybe somebody's invited 4 or 5 people over and they're starting to get kind of loud. So we can be proactive before the neighbor picks up the phone and starts complaining. We can already message that guest directly. So there's things that we definitely are aware of and are trying to address. The platform itself, for those of you that may not be that familiar, you know, it's not just anyone that can go rent. It has to be a verified identification that's uploaded to their platform. There's other means that they use from social media, from email, to confirm that that person is who they are. And so there's a vetting process and a profile that's created for each guest and for each host. And there's a sense of community. Again, why I think Airbnb has been so successful. The guest cares about how they treat those properties. The host cares about that guest experience. We have a guidebook that's available on the listing. So when the guest comes, most of the guests that are staying in these locations want to have the local experience. So we as hosts can give them specific businesses, restaurants, locations that are close to the property for them to be able to go and experience. And so that's a big part of each of the listings. You know, one of the things that was mentioned earlier, and again, I have looked at the stats on AirDNA that provides some of the statistics for the short-term rental industry. The problem is that they're doing that based on data scrapes, and it's only based on historical information at that point in time. So the information that I got from Airbnb specifically is in the city of Atlanta, there are 4,600 hosts. In the state of Georgia, there are 13,000. And right now, there are active listings in Atlanta, 6,900, and 22,000 in the state of Georgia. Through October, there has been host revenue of $58.7 million at an average of about $116 per average night for guest stay. And those are actual numbers provided, not as an estimate, but are specifically from Airbnb. And I've provided other items as well, and I can do the same for Athens and Savannah, if you guys are interested. All right.
Okay. I don't see any questions. So you yourself are a host.
Yes.
And how many properties do you?
I have 7.
Own? 7? Okay. And what capacity are you here on behalf of Airbnb or?
No, sir. I'm here on behalf of myself as a super host that
Okay.
uses the Airbnb platform.
Okay. I just want to be clear on that.
Yep.
All right. I don't see any questions. Thank
All
you,
right.
Rich.
Thank you.
So now we have Sue Lee, and after that, Mr. Webster.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, for having us here today. I'm glad to hear that it seems like we are trying to work towards a solution. Airbnb, along with all the other sharing economy movements, are here. They're strong, but we are glad to try to improve upon it, and we're want to work with everyone on that process as well. On the economic side, I mean, sooner or later, we'll be in another recession, and to prevent deeper recession, Airbnb hosts, VRB hosts, they'll need to increase in number, and they need a safe option. And so far, this is working for us, but we're open to improvements. Airbnb has started a very good structure, and partnering with the states and local organizations, municipalities, will be fruitful to the economy, especially allowing more people to travel when they are able to travel during recessions. And that travel will bring in tourism money for families that wouldn't be able to travel normally. If this were to go away, there'll be a number of hosts that are doing this actively, and they'll probably go back to other means that have done before. For example, maybe Craigslist, where it's a very dangerous situation, and we can't collect and share the finances of that. And the danger, the quality control will all be lacking. So, as you can see, a lot of us here are super hosts. I am myself, we maintain a very high quality. I formerly had a rental property. I've converted to as Airbnb, and honestly, I've kept much better care of it now. I've turned the money, the income, back into the property, having more contractors work on it, adding to the local economy, and just wanted to maintain that quality. I mean, as a rental, we didn't have that requirement before, unless you had maybe a citation, but that was extreme. And now with Airbnb ratings, we're really encouraged to maintain that quality. And in that sense, I mean, we're having better properties for neighborhoods, and we've heard about that too, and for the properties itself, the building itself. So we welcome the inspection of the property, the fundamentals, electrical, plumbing, HVAC. We know that we need to conform with those laws. And again, Airbnbs, I use them as an example because they're very strong, as you know. Their verification system and the review system works very well, but we do encourage working with the state and other legislation. Again, the sharing economy is very strong worldwide, but we look forward to working with you all and creating stronger value through that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weber.
My name's Al Webster. I first of all want to thank you for providing the opportunity for us to provide some input on this important subject. My background is I have been a member of the National Association of Realtors for 36 years, and 36 years ago I pledged to protect and uphold private property rights, and I see this as a property rights issue, and obviously it needs to be controlled and regulated. It's not going away. Something's growing, as someone said, worldwide. What I want to speak to is what I believe the state's role should be in this process. As several people mentioned, every local jurisdiction has different needs, different concerns, and different issues. And therefore, there should be maybe a different type of short-term rental ordinance in Savannah than there would be in Atlanta, and than there would be in Blue Ridge, Georgia, or in where I live is on Lake Lanier. So I think some local control should be allowed and encouraged. The state's role should probably be limited somewhat to providing a framework for collection of the taxes. I've heard that Airbnb and there are other providers like VRBO, which I believe is owned by HomeAway now. Those platforms can also help the state perhaps collect the revenue. I don't think any short-term rental owners that I've talked to have any issue with paying hotel, motel taxes. It is a business, a small business. It's like a gentleman just mentioned, almost the majority of the people only have one property, and sometimes it's their own primary residence, and they want to rent it out or rent rooms in their house to make a little extra money to help make ends meet or to help with retirement. But one of the things that concerns me is I live in Forsyth County, Georgia, on Lake Lanier, and as Steve Guello mentioned, Lake Lanier is a huge tourist attraction. There's over 7 million visitors a year. Most of them don't spend the night because there are no hotels on the shores of the lake. And so people that have boats don't have the opportunity to park their boat at the hotel unless they drive back and forth. And so it just seems like there's a tremendous demand and a need for that type of lodging. But yet Forsyth County, Georgia, for whatever reasons, is attempting to enact overbearing, overburdensome, basically almost totally outlaw short-term rentals. And I think it's arisen out of there's some very wealthy constituents that live on the lake, and there's a lot of multi-million-dollar homes there. Maybe they're full-time residents, and maybe they've got the ear of the commission. I'm not sure exactly what their mindset is, but I've been following it because I own a property on Lake Lanier in Forsyth County, and part of my retirement plan was going to be able to rent out a portion of my home during the summer to generate some extra income. But Forsyth County seemed to be determined to pretty much shut it down. They start out with, they're going to say minimum 7 nights, only 2 people per bedroom, only 1 car, two vehicles per house. They were going to make it so onerous that it was going to be almost impossible to make a profit as a short-term rental host. But then they even decided to go even further. And so their latest proposal, and they're drafting a revisions to the Uniform Development Code that will basically prohibit rental of any home for less than 30 days unless you apply for a conditional use permit. And then they've made the qualifications for even applying for a CUP so restrictive that pretty much nobody will qualify. If you're in a subdivision of any kind, 2-lot subdivision, 10-lot subdivision, 100-lot subdivision, if it's a subdivision, you can't apply. So it seems to me that their intent is to basically shut it down in a place where there's a tremendous demand and a tremendous need for it, because like in Forsyth County, there's no sewer or very little sewer service available to Lake Lanier, so there's no hotels unless you go over to Lake Lanier Islands, where there's a couple of hotels there. But other than that, there's not the Forsyth County does not have the ability to provide lodging on the lake, and yet they are trying to shut it down. So what I would like to see, if there's some state regulations, don't get too much into the trying to regulate every aspect of it, because some of that should be left to local control. But at the same time, I would like to see the state do something to keep the government from depriving people of all their rights. and just saying you can't do it, or you can only do it if you spend millions of dollars to upgrade your property to, like a hotel. And so, I do believe certain safety regulations should be part of any ordinance, but I don't. When we say level the playing field with taxes, that's okay. But the other point I haven't heard made is that a residential home, and that's what we're talking about, a residence, was built to the residential building code, and it should be, it should meet the residential building code, which would mean smoke detectors that function, CO2 detectors, and adequate emergency egress from every bedroom and any sleeping quarters. But to require a residential home to be upgraded to commercial standards that hotels are held to would be a little bit, I think that would be a little egregious to property owners, because it's easy to do if you do it from the ground up. If you're going to put in handicap ramps and handicap parking, if you do all that at the start of construction, it's not nearly as expensive as going back and trying to retrofit houses, make all the doors wide enough, put handicap ramps in. So I don't think it would be fair to go too far making residential residences that are used for vacation rentals to comply to the same standards as a hotel as far as Americans with Disability Act and things like that. So
You have a question, Chairman Stevens?
Getting back to Mr. Lee's point about the Craigslist and the safety, that kind of stuff, hotels are basically in an area where they're really not in a residential community, and this is different because you kind of have a hotel, each one of them within all of them are as far as I know, are in residential communities. Should the state of Georgia, just hypothetically, require a check mark on the format whenever you're leasing these short-term rentals that says that I'm not subject to any space variations that might have children there if you're a sex offender in the list, something to that order? Are we overstepping our bounds as a state to just require the question to be asked? Because you're in a residential community almost always.
right, and I'm not quite sure what your question was.
Should we, in your rental agreement, should you be asked to check that I'm not subject to a restriction on moving into a residential area? Did I ask that correctly?
I see what you're saying. And I don't know the answer. I'm not sure what I'm not quite sure what you're getting at. I know that certain neighborhoods that have HOAs are like their own little government, and people that chose to move into those neighborhoods that are regulated by homeowners associations have already agreed to comply with the covenants. And if the HOA wants to vote to prohibit short-term rentals in that neighborhood, that's certainly within their rights. And
let me ask it a different way. Let's just say that your VRBO short-term rental is next door to a daycare center. Just happenstance. Should the protection for safety in those communities just have a check mark that says I'm not subject to the restrictions on moving in this area? You want to ask it a different way?
Go ahead.
I think what Mr. Chairman is saying is, like, if you own a rental property near a place where kids are going to be, would it be too onerous for the state to require you as a Airbnb person to put a checkbox that says to your customer, I am allowed to be near children? You see what I'm saying? Like, if you're
I see what you're saying.
You
Okay.
can't move
All right,
near a
okay.
playground, right? If
You
you're
mean
on
like,
the registered
for a sex offender or
exactly.
Yes, I would support that. I mean, I think we need to protect the neighbors, and I don't think any host are in this to, they want to be good neighbors, because obviously, they're small property owners. There's not big corporations that own multiple hotels. Most of them only own one property. It's a big asset for them, and they want to be able to continue to operate their business, whether it's part-time, renting out their personal home for a few weeks out of the year, or whether it's just a full-time a vacation rental that's why they own it, or they've chosen to do that as opposed to taking a chance with a long-term rental where you could get a bad tenant, as someone else mentioned. And that's where I would be afraid of if I was going to rent out my house and I have like an in-law suite in my basement. So I could live there, and I could rent out the upstairs, but I wouldn't want to do it on a 12-month basis, because what if I don't like the folks I rented to? But on a week basis, if I rent it for a week and I don't like them, the next time they try to book, then I'll just tell them, I'm sorry, I'm not doing that anymore, whatever. So that, I could do that. I can operate on a short-term basis if I don't want to rent out part of my home on a long-term basis. But I believe that most hosts are good neighbors, try to be good neighbors, and certainly would be sensitive to that type of issue, because they have to get along with their neighbors, and particularly if it's somebody that lives in the home. They know their neighbors, and they're going to have to interact with them on a regular basis. But even hosts that don't live there still going to interact with their neighbors occasionally, because most hosts are very active. They go visit their properties between each guest, or at least very, very often, not like a long-term landlord who only visits the property when the lease is up. A year later, short-term rental owners, hosts, are visiting their property a lot more frequently, or they're having a property manager put eyes on the property a lot more frequently. So they're interacting with the neighbors. They have to be good neighbors. And as far as I think, to me, it sounds reasonable. I have no problem personally making sure during the vetting process for the guests that are going to stay in my home, to make sure that they're safe, that they're not sex offenders, or not convicts, that they're convicted of a serious crime, things like that. I wouldn't have a problem, particularly the sex offender thing, to have the guests certified they're not on the sex offender list. I don't know the platforms, how much screening they do. They do some screening. So you're not just renting to a stranger like a hotel. With a hotel, you can walk up, anybody can walk up and rent a hotel room. But when you rent a home through Airbnb or VRBO, there's a certain screening process that the guests have to go through in order to be approved, and you have a lot more information on them. Credit card. I'm not sure. I've never rented. There's a lot of folks in this room I know that have used Airbnb. Maybe some of you have rented places, and I know it's just like Uber. You can't just. It's not like a taxi. It's the difference between a taxi and an Uber. Anybody can hail a taxi. You don't know who, as a taxi driver, you're picking up, but as an Uber driver, and I've done that too, as an Uber driver, you know that if they have the Uber app, they've been screened by Uber, and Uber has their credit card on file and knows a little bit about them. Now, doesn't eliminate every problem, but it's safer inviting someone into your car as an Uber driver, or inviting someone into your home as a Airbnb host, than being a hotel or a taxi driver where anybody can walk up and rent a home.
Okay. I had one question just to clarify. You started out with saying that you believed that local communities, local governments, counties, cities should be the ones passing the regulations for Airbnb, and that the state, its role should primarily be from a taxation standpoint. Is that correct?
My suggestion is that a mechanism, or even a statewide requirement that taxes be collected, would help level the playing field. And I think the folks from the hotel industry and the hospitality industry that I've heard from, that was one of their major concerns, is that Airbnb hosts were allowed to operate what is similar to a hotel without having to pay the same taxes. Of course, it's good for the state economy. I don't think any host that I've talked to has any problem paying taxes. It's a small business, and they should pay taxes. The state could at least decree and require then Airbnb, if the state required, if there was state regulations that required the collection of hotel motel tax and hospitality fees, or whatever the other hotels have to comply with, then I believe the platforms would make sure that those get collected. And they may collect it up front and it may not be up to the host to render under Caesar. It may be the platforms that collect the money on the front end once the state provides that framework and that requirement. And I did say, don't miss this point, because this is my most important point, is some of the communities have gone a little overboard in depriving hosts of their property rights and the rights to use their property. And I think there needs to be a little bit of state oversight to prevent overburdensome, unreasonable restrictions against rentals on a short-term basis.
Okay, well, because that's a big difference than saying that locals should be able to set the regulations. That would actually be, and that's what we're here to decide or figure out or study, that would be a pretty big role for the state to play, I feel. You know, that goes a lot further than saying that the state should just be there, you know, to set up a taxing regulation authority or a tax framework. That is the state playing a very large role in telling communities what they can and can't do as far as from a regulation of short-term rental standpoint. So I think that, you know, as long as we're talking about this, I think we need to keep the conversation honest. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. If we have no more speakers, then I think we are adjourned. We have, our next meeting is Saturday in Savannah, Georgia. And then we're going to have another meeting next Friday following the special session. Again, that'll be just hearing about the topic of short-term rentals in regards to vehicles. And then we're going to have another meeting at Just Proceeding Biennial in Athens. I forget the date, but it's early December. And barring any other developments, I think that we will. I think those will be the only meetings. But if anything changes, I will do my best to get notices out to the members and to the public. And thank you very much.